Performance Podcast, episode 18. We're going into conditioning. So last time we were talking about strength. This time, diving into some principles of metabolic conditioning. We're going to be a little all over the map, but we're going to try to narrow it down for you guys as much as we can so you can apply it. Brandon, what do you got for us?
Just throw it to me. Yeah, Brandon. Yeah, so, for those
sit back down.
for those that plan to do the mentorship, we're going to do a deep dive into the actual science behind this and even talk about going down to the cellular level of kind of what's going on in the muscles and how the heart's delivering the blood and what's in the blood and how you uptake oxygen when you're breathing, in and out and all of those things. For now, what we want to do is kind of simplify this and give you guys an easy process that you can use as an athlete, or if you just want to have a conversation with your coach, kind of figure out where are my limitations with conditioning in general, and then obviously you still need to narrow those down based on the limitations in the sport. So you can look at your conditioning limitations, but still be bad at ring muscle ups, and you just got to get better at the skills in the sport. So just keep that in mind when we have this conversation. There's kind of been I think a paradigm shift in my own brain when I look at conditioning in the sport. When I was in college, and then even as I took courses just out of college to learn more about energy system training or just conditioning, you kind of heard the words like aerobic and anaerobic or lactic and alactic, and everyone talks about lactic acid as being that's what causes the burn. And now all of those things have kind of been shifted on its head because most of those things aren't true. Oxygen is always present when we're doing work, whether it's a sprint or it's a really long exercise that's maybe 30 to 60 minutes long in CrossFit, which is rare. There's still oxygen present. And lactate is actually a fuel source in our bodies. So there's kind of these things. I'm just giving you guys a kind of a broad concept of why we've changed this and kind of the way that we think about limiters and conditioning. If you're interested in the science behind all that, join the mentorship or watch the masterclass. I'll dive into that. You can do that through the Instagram channel. But as far as talking today, I want to kind of introduce three main limitations. So when we're looking at someone and they're doing the sport of CrossFit, and in particular when it's just true endurance-based work, these three limitations pop up. Either it's a respiratory limitation, it's their ability to uptake oxygen. So as you're breathing in air. You need to take that oxygen and get it from your lungs into your heart, to then the blood can go from the heart into the muscles. And then you have to be able to dispel CO2. So you got to get the CO2 offloaded so that you're not, getting into a position where you can't do any work because you have too much carbon dioxide in your system. Then there's the cardiovascular limitation. That is how your heart delivers the blood to the local tissue. Anytime that you're working, you think about even a biceps curl, you're using energy in the biceps, and you need to have oxygen-rich blood that goes to that muscle to be able to create energy to move the arm. So the heart is that mechanism that's delivering the blood to the biceps or delivering the blood to the quads when you're doing an echo bike sprint. And then that third limitation is the muscular system. So this is where you utilize the oxygen. So once the heart is getting the blood into the biceps for my curl, I have to be able to actually utilize that oxygen for energy to be able to continue to do my biceps curls. And everyone's done this before where you do a burnout set. Has anyone done those? You remember the sevens? You do 7. Yeah, the 21s. Yeah, is that what it's called? Yeah. You do that, and then your last couple of reps, you're failing. And that's because the energy currency is being depleted at the local level. And so those are those three limitations that we're thinking about. And we want to identify those in our athletes because those are trainable characteristics. If someone has a respiratory limitation, you would train them slightly differently than you would someone that has a cardiovascular limitation. And someone that has a muscular limitation, you would train them differently than someone that has a respiratory limitation. So I've talked for a really long time. I don't know if you guys want to jump in or ask any questions before I kind of introduce one test that we can do for this.
Yeah, I think just on a broader range, everything you just said, why is that so important to our sport is because it's not a 100-meter dash and it's not a marathon.
Yes.
Right? So is our sport, would you say our sport is the blend of the energy
all
systems
things.
are all of them all the time? And that's, I think, sometimes we miss that. It's we got to do this anaerobic thing to get better at an anaerobic workout. But really, it's how often is something just the anaerobic energy system or just aerobic? Pretty much never.
Yeah. I mean, you're never just, even if you're doing an all-out sprint, you still need oxygen to be able to, one, utilize the energy properly, and then two, to be able to recover. And like we talked about in our strength podcast, the ability to repeat a barbell. You're bracing really hard, you're picking that up, you're using a ton of energy, and the best in the sport, 2 seconds later are recovered, and now they can do it again. But that's because they have systems that support that. And so the way we think about conditioning is like it's this integrated system to be able to uptake oxygen, to be able to deliver it to our muscles, and then to be able to utilize it. Now, if those are the 3 steps, we need to think about, okay, what is the rate limiting step? And I know that for those that have listened to this podcast, you kind of hear me bringing that up because that's just like, that's my whole framework when I'm thinking about coaching. Like, what is holding this person back and how can we drive that dial up? One of my favorite examples of this is Elon Musk in the book. Well, who wrote that book? Walter Isaacson. He tells the story in the book, and you can just like go on YouTube too and see like, you know, Elon talk about this. But when the early days of Tesla, they were really struggling to have enough production. Like they couldn't build the Model 3, I think is what it was at the time, fast enough for the demand. And so they were losing a ton of money. So Elon goes onto the manufacturing floor, and his whole thing was like for a week, he slept on the floor and he was just trying to find the rate limiting step. He's like, what can we do here to get these cars off the line faster? And they identified that, they fixed it, and then they asked again, okay, now what's the rate limiting step? So as they get something better, there's still always a rate limiting step. And the same thing's true in CrossFit. The same thing's true in conditioning, where one may be a weakness now, you drive it up, and then something else is the weakness. So just keep that in mind as we have this conversation of like, you may be cardiovascularly limited, you improve that, now maybe you're muscularly limited, and you got to keep improving that. So it's always the dials on a music board where you're trying to always bump them up to 10s out of 10s instead of having a 1 or a 2 down here and a 6 or a 7 on the other side.
No, I think it begs the question then to give examples of, hey, what does it look like to have respiration limitation, a cardiovascular limitation, a muscular limitation? Walk us through some examples of that.
Yeah. So I think the first thing, anybody can do this too at home, maybe take a couple of days between the test, but a speed preservation test can give you at least a very good baseline of where you're limited. And so the way that you would do this, let's just use a row because I love using machines that we use in the sport. So like you could use a rower, an echo bike. I mean, I guess you could do a run, but there's not a ton of running unless you're a games athlete. So usually a rower or an echo bike. The first one would be an all-out max effort sprint. So tell the athlete, or if you're at home, you want to do this right now while you're listening to it, jump on your rower, warm up well first. Don't just do a 10-second sprint, and then do a 10-second or 12-second max effort sprint. And all you're looking for is how fast you can go on the rower. So let's say you get it down to a 118 out of 500 pace, which is pretty fast. You'll see maybe a really powerful guy get it down to like a 107 or 108, which is just crazy. Like I can't even imagine getting it that fast. Then maybe a couple hours later or a couple of days later, do a 2K row test, right? So now we're in that like 6 to 9 minute range. So a little bit longer. That's more realistic of what CrossFit looks like. Then a couple of days later, do a 5K row or a 30-minute row. So now we're going triple the time. So something that's kind of like at the longest end of the sport that we see in a qualifier or maybe in a semifinal. Sometimes at the games, you'll see a longer event, but usually not. So I don't usually test past maybe 30 minutes. Then from there, what you want to do is chart this out on a graph. For the athlete that has no top-end kick, right? And you see this a lot of times with athletes that are untrained or the athletes that's just weak. Let's say they do a 10-second sprint and they're at like a 147 over 500 for a male. And then they do the 2K, and their 2K pace is a 150. Like there's no drop off. So they're actually decent at the 2K, but they have no top end power. And then their 5K is a 154. So really everything's super tight and clustered. That athlete is usually utilization limited, meaning they can't produce enough energy at the local level to produce power for that movement. And you could do that same thing, testing with a barbell or other things, just identifying, oh, this is a strength limitation. And again, almost always, if someone's not good at that, then they're not good at the strength work. So that athlete would be utilization limited. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you may have an athlete that can absolutely crush the max effort test. And everyone's seen this in the gym. The guy that just played football, he's 24 years old, 23 years old, out of college, comes in, he does a 10-second sprint, and he's the guy that gets it down to a 107. Like, it is so impressive how powerful they are. Or they get on the echo bike, and they can tap it out and do 50 cals in like 20 seconds. But then you have that guy do a 2K. He was at a 107 over 500 for his 10-second sprint. His 2K pace is a 151. Like, complete drop-off. Like, he crushes the first couple hundred meters, and then all of a sudden he can't sustain it at all. And then his 5K is even slower, a 204 out of 500. So now there's this range that's super wide. That athlete is typically cardiac limited, meaning that their heart isn't doing a good enough job of delivering the blood to the local tissue. So no matter how good they can utilize the oxygen, they don't have the oxygen in the tissue to be able to utilize it, right? So they're not getting that, bolt into the tire, so to speak, that Elon Musk needs for his car. Then the respiratory limited athlete is kind of a mix between the two. You'll see this in two different ways, and this is probably the hardest to identify. You either have the really, really high-level athlete that's so well-developed, like their muscular endurance is so good, their ability to utilize oxygen at the local level is so good, and their heart is so efficient that the only limiting step is their respiratory system. So it's just like, let's keep driving that up so that you can get more and more oxygen or air in so that you can get the oxygen from the lungs into the heart and actually be able to use it. So like, think about it. If the heart is so efficient that it's getting blood through, but the lungs can't get the O2 into the blood, you're not getting enough into the actual local
And you're
tissue.
testing that via VO2.
You could test that. Well, yeah, I mean, and
for
just
maximal oxygen uptake, or
right. But the VO2 is the same the concept of like, you're going to test all three of those limitations at once.
Right. Yeah.
Or on the other side of the coin, there are untrained athletes that just don't know how to breathe, or they're really bad at bracing, or have really bad movement economy in the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you'll see this, and I see this with masters athletes all the time. They're holding their thruster and it's off their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
So they may not actually even have a respiratory limitation, but they're causing one in CrossFit because they're holding their breath the entire time. So I still think about training them the same way of like, we need to improve those positions and learn how to breathe into the bottom of a squat, in the overhead squat, in a front rack position, so that you're improving that limitation first, because no matter how well developed any of your systems are, if you're holding your breath, you're just not getting oxygen in.
Yeah.
So if you look at all those, then you're like, okay, well, how do we improve this? Like, if these are the systems that our body's actually using in conditioning, we want to get better at the sport of CrossFit, we think about training in a different way, as opposed to it just being like, oh, this person just needs power output work, or this person needs a lot of long, slow endurance work. And so that's where a coach comes in to kind of help identify those limitations and then be able to actually change those.
It's great. I feel like I just learned a lot.
Well, no. To go to the we can even take them each a little step further at a time. The utilization athlete, the athlete who, in your example, cannot go that hard on the machine. I think little note on the machine too. I would almost prefer to use the bike than the rower. I know the rower is so sports specific, but because of movement economy being potentially such a big limitation on the rower, I would be almost apt to just say, just stick everybody in the bike. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've done it both ways. I think the bike, for someone that's completely untrained, it almost always comes up that it's like, my legs just burn so bad because they haven't done it. Yeah. So you just got to be aware of that as a coach. Maybe even do the profile for both. There are a lot of times for higher level athletes, I'll do the speed preservation test where I do it on a rower and on a bike erg. And
it would be nice to see both
running.
In a perfect world. It sucks to test that, but like that would be really nice to see both of them, like a 20-minute max wattage, average wattage on the bike, and the same on the rower, and then just compare apples to apples that way. Yeah. But go back to the utilization athlete. Oh, Jake, don't go too deep. I want to ask it. What is let's do it. What is the mechanism that is preventing that particular athlete from being able to, to go harder in that example? Because I would say, I mean, it's primarily limited by the brain and spinal cord, nervous system driven. But can you touch on that?
Well, there's definitely a huge nervous system component, and that's kind of outside of the conditioning systems. Yep. And so obviously it's not touched here. We're talking about just like those conditioning systems that we use in our body to be able to, again, oxygen. If you get one thing from this, oxygen is king. Yeah. Like we talk about kind of anaerobic versus aerobic and all that stuff. It's like, everything that we do, we need to get as much oxygen and then utilize as much oxygen at the local level. You become a better CrossFitter. And in fact, if you take what's called a muscle oxygen monitor and you put it on the best CrossFitters, usually they're the ones that can either sustain it, or if they utilize it really fast, they're able to replenish it really quickly. Mm-hmm. Whereas most of us just kind of deplete down to, like, let's say 20%, and we can't do anything else. Another thruster, I'm so messed up in my legs, I can't do another thruster. And then it takes me like 7 or 8 minutes to be able to recover. High-level CrossFitter, typically, like, they're recovering in, literally like 10% of the time. So sorry, that was a side note.
No, sorry. No, keep going. With what you're going to say.
I don't remember what I was
never mind. Very,
you asked the question.
Very practically then, how do you improve utilization for that particular athlete?
Yeah, so there are a couple things to think about. One, it is the nervous system, because I know that's what you just asked. That is just learning how to ramp up your nervous system, get someone that they can engage their – essentially, a lot of people are either overtrained and they're really dampened, so their nervous system can't ramp up correctly, or they just have never done it before. So you want –
Side note, no, sorry, all the tangents, but I think that 10-second all-out like bike test, to credit to Sean, it is kind of like the tap test or the grip test.
100%.
It can be a really good indicator. So I've done it in training where I'll program somebody doing a 10-second max out echo bike every Monday, just to get like a gauge of how well their nervous system is
Are
recovering.
you ready for training?
Exactly. Yeah. Especially if I'm doing it right now with an athlete who has terrible sleep, has no choice. His son doesn't sleep well. And so it's just to get a little bit of I want to see a trend. I just started working with him over the first several weeks. Like, what's happening here? Is this a yo-yo? Are we staying pretty, stable? It's imperfect, but it's better than nothing.
For sure. I think it's a great way. Again, same thing. Like, you even do a simple grip test to your point of like.
Those are cheap on Amazon.
Yeah,
too.
and how ready are you to train?
Yeah. The tap test on the phone. That's just really frustrating.
It's crazy hard too. Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
My test that I do is how well I write programs that day. In all seriousness, have you guys had this where it's like you just have a little brain fog if you're a little overtrained?
No, I always write great programs.
Nothing a white monster can't fix.
Hey, can you edit that out, actually? No. To go back to your question, sorry for the tangent for all those that are still listening.
Yeah, it really. It's like go back and watch a strength video or something.
Yeah.
But like,
well, I mean, with the athlete that maybe isn't utilizing the oxygen well, it could just be a legitimate strength issue. They need to continue to get stronger. You see a lot of weaker athletes that just they don't have either the nervous system development or the strength development to be able to utilize the oxygen well and then put power into a barbell or into the rower, into the echo bike or whatever that is. You also, with conditioning protocols, I think can use power-based work. I will do something simple like, hey, they're doing a 10-second max effort row sprint. They're going to rest close to full recovery and repeat that multiple times. And you can honestly do the same thing for a respiratory limited athlete with shorter rest to make sure that they're getting close to their VO2 peak, but teaching them how to produce more power. The key there on the local level is you have to build mitochondrial density. You have to have more mitochondria in the tissue to be able to actually use the oxygen.
Mitochondria meaning the
powerhouse of the cell. Yep. And essentially, the concept there is just like we're trying to replenish the ATP, which is the currency of energy, right? So more mitochondria, more energy, that's a thumbs up. And then capillary density helps with that too. The capillaries.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I don't know the definition you're going to use, but essentially, like it's like this. It's what is the bridge to get oxygen into the tissue and to get waste byproduct out. Yeah. That's kind of the way that I would describe that.
I think the easiest thing is just increasing blood flow to the tissue.
Totally.
Or means by which you can increase. More channels. I think is the best way of thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a good way.
You can literally build more channels towards your tissue.
Right, which means that more oxygen's coming in, and then again you can get that waste byproduct out. That all the hydrogen ions that cause that burn, you're able to get them out. It helps you buffer a little bit more so you don't feel that burn.
How do you build that capillary density, mitochondrial density, so you can utilize oxygen more effectively?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways you can do this. If it's just conditioning-based work, let's say that I'm just trying to get better on the ergs, it's going to look a little bit different than doing CrossFit, but the same principles apply. It's going to look like CrossFit. Actually, the best way I describe it is the nice thing is that you can still do CrossFit-based intervals. So one, you need to do high-power work. You want to do high-power intensity work where it's a little bit shorter, you're resting in full recovery. That's one way to build mitochondrial density and capillary density. And then you also still are going to do some moderate level, longer work. But for the utilization-limited athlete, you never need to be doing a 60-minute session or a 30-minute session because there's no benefit to it. Like even with recovery, there's other ways. Just go on your walk and do your zone 1 stuff. You don't need to be doing long, slow, easy work. So if you're the athlete that loves endurance, but is very weak, stop doing the endurance work for a while and just start strength training and start doing a lot of high-powered work. That's going to build your mitochondrial density. That's going to build your capillary density. That's going to allow your nervous system to develop so that you can put more into the machines.
What role does hypertrophy and muscle size play in
a huge role, and this is why strength training
or a softball. Go, Brandon.
Yeah, and this is why strength training matters so much in the sport of CrossFit. We just had a conversation about it. We kind of lean more towards, hey, for the better athlete, the stronger athlete, they need to do more strength endurance work. But we did talk about weak Wendy or weak Wayne, which is the athlete that just comes in and can barely snatch or clean or deadlift or front squat, whatever. They have to do strength work, and one way to get stronger is to build the size of the muscle. Mm-hmm. It's not the only way. There are a lot of, you see this with like Guy. I mean, he's really not that big, but he's so freaking strong. But for most people, doing some hypertrophy work is going to help with that.
Dom, you want to jump into that real quick? Because like Zorski's real big on that. I know you're heavily influenced by him, and you've always preached the importance of hypertrophy.
Yeah, I almost, like, no matter who a person is, that's kind of how I start most people's off season. It's like a minimum of like 6 to 8 weeks of hypertrophy, especially for newer clients or people newer to the sport. Like, I probably wouldn't put Guy through a hypertrophy test. It would be kind of fun to see how big he could get, but
it's disgusting.
Like, the dude make an incredible
not
bodybuilder.
Disgusting. You'd be,
he would.
But yeah, like it's something I always do almost as like a base level for basic strength.
Yeah.
right? Because it does play a major factor.
The other utilization part, obviously, I'm just sitting.
Sure.
Nutrition,
specifically.
glycogen, right? Like the bigger your muscles are, the more glycogen you can store. The more glycogen you can store, the more energy you can use. Glycogen, by the way, is glucose that you're storing in your tissue, right? So, which when we talk about the currency of energy, the primary driver of energy in CrossFit is glycogen.
Yeah.
Right?
And in most things too, you know, I think everyone thinks like the marathon runner is just like in this quote unquote oxidative pathway. Yes, they're always using oxygen, but I think it's something like 80% is what
the guy
we were talking about.
Yeah, what was the guy's name on Andy Galpin's podcast? Dom, I don't know if you heard this, but he said something. Oh gosh, who's the marathoner? The Kenyan who just broke the world record.
The unbelievable guy. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Chris is
But he was using
Kipchoge.
Yes.
Yeah. So he actually, I think it was 80%. I think you're right.
80% during
80% of his marathon, his world record sub 2 hour marathon was, he was using primarily glycogen the entire time.
It's just insane.
Yeah, crazy. That's insane.
Because
we think
he's going
it's an
fast,
aerobic activity, aerobic, right? Like where you're saying this is the limitation of that language.
Correct.
Right? Like even, I didn't know this. Brandon and I were talking about it yesterday. To get a little nerdy for a second, like typically we would describe those power intervals, like the 10-second all-out sprint with full recovery, as alactic training. Alactic meaning without the presence of lactate.
Yeah.
But your body actually is producing lactate.
Yeah, all the time.
At all time.
Yeah, I mean, if you pricked your ear or your thumb or whatever you wanted to do now, you would still have some lactate. Obviously, there is a threshold, right? Like if you get too much, you can't utilize it. There's too much hydrogen. It can't buffer it. And then all of a sudden you get
too
that
much,
burn.
what's preventing too much is the amount of oxygen that you're taking. Yeah. So,
and obviously you get so much waste byproduct that's the burn that you feel. So there's still some good markers that we can use.
But to your point, it really comes down to how much oxygen do you have available? How well can you take it in? How well can you pump it? How well can you utilize it? It really does boil down to that.
Totally. So let's just say that we are using a 2K protocol for this utilization athlete. We would do some sprint-based work to start a training program. We would run those all the way through, let's say an 8-week or a 12-week cycle. I'm trying to get as much power output as I can. They're doing all their muscular endurance work. They're doing their strength work too. And then for the 2K rowing, they're just going maybe 6 intervals, a 500-meter row at their 2K pace, resting 2 minutes or 3 minutes
in
between.
The long, steady state work for them, because I know you're saying
that is their long, steady state. They're not doing anything else.
Yeah, or if they did, right, like at that point, like you said, it's not really benefiting them. It could even be holding them back because it's more energy expenditure and there's no free lunches. We know that. But if at the very least, it's recovery work. That's about it.
I would say, hey, if you need to go do something, you're literally walking and you're walking at a slow pace. Like you shouldn't, they just really shouldn't do any zone 2 work. It doesn't make sense.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. What about the athlete? Because zone 2 has become so big in the sport now, right?
No. There's a place for it, and especially for the cardiac limited athlete, but for someone that needs to work on their power, their strength, which again, that's how we're classifying that utilization athlete. It just, you're wasting time. We've talked about this before. If you only have 90 minutes in the day, and it's like, hey, I need these 3 zone 2 sessions that are all 45 minutes. Now I've wasted all this time in my training week to do something that's not benefiting me, and in fact may make me worse.
But what if the athlete comes to you and they go, but Peter Attia said I need 150 minutes a week of zone 2 training.
I mean, Peter Attia is not a CrossFit coach.
Mic drop.
No, I mean, look, he's using research for health and wellness.
Yeah.
We're talking about performance-based athletes, and these limitations, like honestly, VO2 is a great predictor of health, lifespan, health span that he talks about. However, VO2 is not a great predictor if you bunch it into like a group of performance. Okay, so it's a good predictor of lifespan. It's not a good predictor of performance. In other words, if you had 10 athletes that were between 60 and 70 of their VO2, just because someone's 70 and someone's 60 doesn't mean the 70 person's going to win, right? Now, whereas with lifespan, it does matter. So I think that's just kind of like the way that you got to look at it is like.
There's no way you're telling me Colton Mertens has a higher VO2 than James Sprague.
Right.
Yeah, right? Like anecdotal.
No, exactly. Yeah, I probably didn't explain that well, but that's kind of the point of like, yes, it does matter, but everyone at the top's kind of grouped together, within a couple of percentage points, and then it comes down to, psychology, movement efficiency, skills, all those kind of things that we can't. It's sport practice.
How much have you seen that, Dom? Just like coaching on the floor, for years now. I mean, you've been coaching elite athletes on the floor for years. How much do you see that play out? Where it's like the biggest VO2. I know we're not testing their VO2 max. Some of them are, but how much are you seeing that anecdotally?
Oh yeah, I mean, like use Sprague Sprague's probably a good example because he can produce that type of power on the rower in the 10 seconds, and he can row like a 16 something 5K.
Yeah, just insane.
Like, it's crazy, and he can find both ends. That's probably also why he was like top 3, won the games.
Totally.
But
and his biggest limiter is top end strength, right? Just with like probably
right.
anthropomorphics, like his
but
build.
that's the thing he's worked on the most.
So is it because of his overall size that he can put out so much power on the machines?
I think so, especially like on a rower, like the length.
Because you would think with the strength, the top end strength limitation, which he's closing that gap, would prevent him from being able to do that. So at that point, is it more just his size?
I think what's interesting with him too is
going on a tangent, but
the strength limiter was squat based, which is like because of his limbs.
Yeah.
But
and
again,
we're in a sport where limbs matter, right? Like
yes.
you watch Colton Mertens do the feed sack squats, and I mean he's incredible, and I love him to death. But like he just has a shorter distance to go than Sprague does.
Yeah, and I think like you could, using a little more of a sport specific example, is like Sprague actually used to really struggle with workouts like Gretel, 3 clean and jerk, 3 bar facing burpee, and just like powering that out as fast as he could. He would actually like literally his legs would explode, and he like clearly couldn't get any oxygen in. So like he used to work on a lot of training for that as well, but like machines specifically, he had both ends. So he's kind of like a weird guy, but I would say like Dallin, like just thinking of guys that I have seen specifically, like a lot of it was like the opposite end. He could get you like the 107 on the rower, but the 5K was behind. The 2K was actually good, but the 5K was the fall off.
Right.
So once he would get over like the 7-minute mark is when the drop off would happen. And especially for him for like running.
Yeah.
Really. Like he could still probably hang in a 400-meter run, but if you got him like a mile or higher, like a mile and then to a 5K, he's not even close. He wasn't close to the top games athlete. So he's
obviously he's closed that gap. Yeah.
That's what I was going to ask you, like just to kind of walk through is like, so you said like doing strength for the person who like their sprint, their 2K and their 5K are all pretty kind of similar. Like there isn't much of a gap. Like doing strength for that person actually helps
for sure
them. For someone who's on the opposite end, who's like the sprint is really high, but the drop-offs are big, what do you do with them actually strength-wise? And then like how much zone 2 would you prescribe, or what type of aerobic work would you prescribe?
Yeah, man, this is what's fun about CrossFit is because it's not just an endurance sport. It really is an endurance sport in general, but maybe the games athletes are doing some endurance workouts. But we still need to think about it as an endurance sport because we have to have systems that, again, can get the oxygen in, deliver it, and utilize it for all the things that we want to do, even as simple as like a handstand push-up or a ring muscle-up. Everyone's been to the place where they can't do another handstand push-up because their shoulders are just so blown up, or they can't do another squat because their legs are burning so bad. And part of that is like getting these systems as efficient as we can. So that's kind of like just a quick side note. For someone that is extremely powerful, but they have this huge drop-off, typically they're cardiac limited, meaning their heart's not as efficient as the local muscle. I think it's important real quick to just kind of take another side tangent. Just because I say someone's cardiac limited doesn't mean that they still can't do a lot of long, easy work, or they're not really good at a 15-minute AMRAP, because there are different tiers to this. You know, like Dallin Pepper may be cardiac limited, but his 5K is way better than 99.9% of the sport. But if he wants to compete with the best, maybe we're just looking at that limitation saying, hey, this is the one that we want to drive up so that we can cut that 5K down by another 10 seconds, and now you're competitive with the other 5 games athletes that are close to you on the, on that range. So just keep that in mind. And the same thing's true. Like I am, based on the test, utilization limited right now, but I'm still pretty strong for, just like a normal 35-year-old male, and I can still put out a lot of output. It's just that I'm too close together. I can't get that true top-end speed that I used to. So my training, I'm doing more power-based work because I just want to, again, clean up that limiter and then find another one, right?
I think to go back on that too, like just, again, knowing like this is why so many other things, if you just do that test and no other context, you could approach training wrong, right? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, I think it's simple enough that it does, like the graph shifts, but if it's clustered close or if it's clustered far apart, you already know.
Because a guy like you is like, you're just detrained, right? Like, you're naturally more inclined to be high power output. So for you,
here's a perfect example. Yeah. 5 years ago when I was training a little bit more seriously, which I'm kind of starting to get back into that right now, I could probably pull like a 112-ish for my height. That was really, really good. My 2K row was like a 131, 132 pace. Pretty good, again, for my body size, 190 pounds, 5'9", whatever. My 5K row was, again, kind of pretty good, right? Elite level. Now my 2K and my 5K are still pretty close to where they were, but my top end speed has gone from that 112, 113 to like 122. I just did it the other day. Like I have no power output on the row, and maybe that's some movement efficiency stuff, but the same thing's true on the Echo bike. I used to be able to like crush, 10 cows in a couple of seconds, and now I get on there, it's like, zzz. So I know that, hey, I'm actually still pretty well developed. My cardiovascular system's working well. My respiratory system's working well. I need to be able to put more output into it. But if I told someone 121 was not very good, that's not true. Like it's still good for the sport. It's just, again, the baseline is always yourself. It's not anybody else.
What I'm saying is, like, if you had an athlete who's detrained, like you said, dampened or something, it's like you got to clean up the lifestyle factors, or it doesn't matter how many sprints you do. Yeah. But keep going.
So to go back to that cardiac limited athlete, like if we were thinking about that same 2K row progression, just to like make this super simple, maybe you would do different progressions with them, but let's say they were doing a 2K row, what you would want to do with someone if you're trying to target to get their heart to be as efficient as possible, you'd want to do slower starts with them or broken intervals. And what that looks like, if it's a 500-meter row, let's say that their 2K pace was a 135. They may go 100 meters. So they're doing 500-meter rows, rest 2 minutes times 8 sets. Let's say that's, because that's kind of like a standard protocol you see in the sport. Each of those, they're going to do 100 meters at 145, 100 meters at 140, 100 meters at 135, 100 meters at 130, and then they're going to finish with 100 meters at 125. So now they're going at a really hard sprint. That's still 500 meters. You're just breaking the intervals. They're basically changing their speed throughout. The reason you'd want to do that with a cardiac limited athlete, someone that's not as efficient in their heart, is because there's something called cardiac lag. So what happens is if you start, anybody can do this. Like right now, you're at your resting heart rate. If I told Jake to go over there on the runner and just sprint 10 seconds,
I'm flying, baby.
His heart rate wouldn't really adjust. It takes probably 20 or 25 seconds to get the heart rate up. And so the first 25 seconds of that interval is meaningless for improving his heart efficiency, right? To improve his cardiac output. And so what we want to do instead, and there's other stuff going on at the local level. Like if you desaturate the muscles super fast, you can't get blood back into it because you're so occluded. So there's another side to that too. So what we want to do is ease into an interval so that they're using their heart correctly the entire 500 meters. Then they'll rest 2 minutes, and we're just going to keep doing slow starts. And the way that you can produce more power is you're finishing at a 125 for that athlete. And the average across that 500-meter interval is still their 2K pace. Mm-hmm. So they're still going really hard. They're still pushing themselves. But now the entire interval, we're actually improving what the limiter is, as opposed to just telling them, yeah, just go out as hot as you want. And then they're not getting any improvement with their heart because, again, the first half of the interval, their heart rate's at 62 beats per minute.
Right. Yeah, I think maybe an obvious thing to point out, but it's because, like, thinking of the ramp up, it's because we're trying to isolate the heart specifically.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, people could do this. You jump on the Echo bike and you just do a 30-second sprint. What you feel first, legs, right? Like your legs are going to blow up. And so I can't even use my heart correctly because now I'm slowing down because my legs blow up. Same thing on the row. If you just take them and they're always going too hot, then they're not able to isolate the heart, which is what you're trying to work on.
With that being the case, why wouldn't you then just sit on a biker at damper 2-3 so that muscle endurance is not a limiter for you isolating the heart in particular?
Yeah, and you can do that, and you should do some zone 2 work or some easy long aerobic work, which is what kind of the term everyone uses for this type of athlete. The one thing that happens, though, is that if you're just doing that, you're not going to help them in the sport of CrossFit.
Yeah.
They have to do high-intensity intervals. They have to get to their VO2 peak because otherwise, as everyone knows, you do that 15-minute AMRAP, you get 3 minutes in, and you're like, oh, my goodness, I've done all this conditioning work. That was, I did 2 hours of zone 2 every single week, and it's not helping me when I'm going this hard.
Yeah, I think the simplest way I've always said is you still have to train the pace, right? Like
exactly.
You still have to do pace work specifically. Yeah.
One of my former colleagues, I love the way that he describes it. He's like, look, your hard work is like doing your strength work where it's your back squat is the main thing. If I want to drive up my back squat, I still have to back squat. There's this, the SAID principle, which is specific adaptations to impose demands. I need to work on my back squat. And then all the accessory stuff, like maybe I'm doing some split squats and some, leg extensions or hamstring curls or gliding leg curls, all these things to like keep my knees healthy and get a little bit stronger at the joint. But the main thing is back squats. In conditioning, the main thing still needs to be the main thing. Like you're still getting better at the sport. And then all of these accessory pieces, the zone 2 or even rowing intervals are just ways to improve those limiters.
Yeah, I like the way Jack Daniels will talk about it, like in the context of running with zone 2 development, where it's like your heart is working the hardest it's going to work while still getting the biggest, I forget exactly word for word how he describes it. I always butcher it when you're doing zone 2 work specifically. But I think like you're right. Zone 2 has become such a craze in our sport, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Zone 2 is becoming incredibly popular in CrossFit, which was all about pukey and going all out all the time. It's like such a paradigm shift. Like you said, we've swung the pendulum, at least on the competitive side of things. But yeah, at the expense of pace work.
Right.
So,
And if you layer in both, then you're getting the best of both. So you think about zone 2 this way. The idea, or what I'm trying to do for a CrossFitter, is I want to help improve some elasticity in the heart. The heart is kind of like a balloon in that like you want it to be able to expand and get a full stroke of blood in before you contract. So you think about it like a bike tire. If I'm pumping up a bike tire and I'm just like doing really short strokes, I don't get air into the tire. But if I do like this really full, long, smooth stroke, I'm getting all the air into the pump and then all of that air from the pump into the tire. The same thing with zone 2. So we're trying to stretch the heart and then contract, stretch the heart and contract. In zone 2, you can do that because you're not getting into this like crazy heart rate where it's like beating all over the place. You're not having to brace where that changes the way that your heart interacts with the brace. And then you're also not getting local fatigue. So if I'm doing a run and you're doing zone 2 work, you shouldn't feel a bunch of burn in your legs. Otherwise, your heart's not going to function the way that it should.
Practical takeaway being, hey, your zone 2 work, don't worry too much about sport specificity.
Yes,
I would say the bike erg is probably the best tool if you have access to one. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. I mean, if people need more mileage on their feet, then I'll have people do a walk, run, walk,
It's just
run.
like you said, though, earlier, unless you're at like the games level.
You have to be like a Jeff Adler uses zone 2 running all the time, just from what I've listened to. And very few people can actually do that. And I think he probably is tracking it a little incorrectly because they were saying like, he's at 65% running 6.5 minute miles.
We have games athletes that can barely walk in zone 2, power walk in zone 2.
Yeah.
I mean,
and like I think that's why some of it also became a little bit of like a craze.
Yeah.
It's like nobody was doing anything without intensity. It was like everything has to have intensity or it's not going to get you better at CrossFit.
I think it was an important thing. Yeah. Like pull people back a little bit. So I still advocate it.
And like I think there has to be some foundational base like of a lot of people that come in. Like I know athletes that it's helped so much. Like I actually did a ton with Jorge this year on running, but we had to find specific stuff and I had to like multiple times sit him down and be like, you just wasted a whole session because you were running in zone 5 for 45 minutes. Like that's just
impressive.
I was like, that's just idiocy. That's literally what I told him. I was like, you might as well just sat on your couch and like took a nap because it like is setting us back in a sense for him.
Yeah, I think where you know it's become I had an athlete reach out the other day, semi-final or sanctional level athlete, and they were like, hey, I've got time for a double session today, and they don't normally have time for it. And they were like, should I do some zone 2? And you're just, and this is like an aerobic freak to use the general term, and you're like,
no.
It's literally like, I mean, it will literally serve no purpose. Recovery will be the purpose, right? Like Sean was talking about, if it does lower basal cortisol levels, okay, maybe. But this one session, like, it's like,
sure. Should have told them to have 2 rice cakes with jelly in between.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, drink your pineapple
60
juice.
60 grams, y'all.
I need to get back on it.
Just to your point too, I think that it's important that athletes again identify like what are the other limitations. Like instead of zone 2 work, if you need to get better at
I was gonna say, since when if we go back to and then we can move on. Since when in our sport do we have athletes reaching out going, should I do some extra zone 2 work? It used to be.
Can I do a Metcon?
Can I do a Metcon? Yeah.
But I think they're turning the zone 2 into a long Metcon. To your point, right? Like they're well above the 65%. And zone 2 is like, if you ask like 5 different endurance coaches, they all have different ranges for it anyhow.
60 to 70, 65 to 70,
Right. Yeah. And here's another thing, just I know we're jumping all around, but this is important to think about. If you're just tracking your heart rate, and if you're doing it well, you'll notice that your heart rate is different every single day based on stress, heat, caffeine intake, how you slept, how you slept, what your training looked like before. Are you bracing, not bracing?
This is why Orange Theory is stupid.
Caffeine intake and sleep affects my heart rate so much.
Right.
And like people do not recognize that. Even like athletes, like let's say they get to a Wednesday and I had like more of like an aerobics, a longer aerobic session programmed. And they're like, I can't even do it. I'm like, well, maybe we should just, because you're probably like literally not recovered.
Right.
Like, so it's like not even.
Yeah.
This is what's been nice, like learning for me, just running, having that single modality, looking at my heart rate on every run, and then being able to go. Because now I know if it's a cool evening and I'm running, but my heart rate is climbing like fast, like I'm getting into like I'm running like a 8:45 minute per mile pace on a 4 mile easy run. and I'm getting to like 165, 170 heart rate, I'm waking up sick the next day. Like I'm going to get sick.
Yeah.
Like I know
Like
it's coming.
you know it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy how that works.
It's crazy. So yeah, good point with that too, where it's like there's so many things that factor into that as well.
Right.
So your pace ought to change because
Correct.
again, to just really make that distinction, there's a difference between training pace and training your heart, right? And so when you're training your heart, you should take those things into account. I mean, it doesn't matter what your pace is at that point.
Right. Exactly.
It matters what your heart rate is. So yeah.
100%.
Keep going then to
that would be, again, like the cardiovascularly limited athlete.
the respiratory.
They're going to do slow starts, increase their pace throughout. And you could do the same thing with like a Metcon. So maybe I'll have them they're doing a 20-minute AMRAP. They're not going to get a ton of benefit, believe it or not, if they're just doing limiter-based training, right? There's a difference between performance where everyone just needs to do the same thing as you get close to a competition because you have to scrimmage the sport, and that athlete that's building on their limiter or trying to improve their limiter. But let's say they're doing a 20-minute AMRAP, all forced breaks in there. So it's, again, it's like broken intervals with a row. They're doing broken AMRAP intervals. So 20 minutes are on the clock. They go through a round, and every round they must rest 30 seconds. And that's just trying to, basically oxygenate the muscles again, give themselves time to recover, and then they go again for another round. And every 3 rounds, I may say, now you got to rest 60 seconds. And that seems crazy, but now at least I can target the heart a little bit more. There's some controversy on if that actually works in CrossFit, but I've had a lot of success with that just based on getting exposure earlier in the off season to those movements and learning how to ramp up as you go. One thing I like to do with that, sorry, I know you were asking a question.
No, I just want to say, go.
20-minute AMRAP, and like I said, 30-second rest in between each of the rounds, but then they start at 5 out of 10 RPE, and then after 2 rounds, it's at a 6 out of 10. After 2 rounds, it's at a 7 out of 10. So it's the same concept, slow start, we're ramping up, and by the end, they're still doing sport-specific work. Yeah. It's a great way to kind of integrate training to where they feel like they're doing hard CrossFit, but I know at least I can kind of regulate what's going on at the heart level.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if the benefits you're reaping from that are less about what's actually happening physiologically and more about just learning how to pace.
That, I think, is probably 98% of it.
Yeah.
And this is something that
I
haven't been taught.
Yeah.
This is something that I've just used over the last couple of years, and it's worked really well. Most people don't get it because a lot of people just need to get stronger. So they're like, hey, I've never seen you do a 20-minute AMRAP. It's only for those that like are already really, really strong and need a lot of that. But that has helped a ton. And maybe for a games level athlete, they're starting at a faster pace, but you can still slow start someone or have broken intervals in the off season. Again, you wouldn't do this 4 weeks before a competition. Then for the respiratory limited athlete, your goal here is to try to teach them how to uptake oxygen better, like be more efficient with uptaking oxygen, or like learn how to control their diaphragm. So if it is someone that is really struggling with just learning how to breathe, doing basic breath work with them is boring, but it's helpful. I'll have masters athletes hold a front squat position and just do box breathing, or hold a hinge position and do box breathing. That seems like it's not going to help you, but man, if you can just learn how to get oxygen into your lungs so that you actually can get it into your heart and then deliver it to your muscles, that's a huge step in the right direction. You'll feel better when you do CrossFit. For the athlete that is like truly respiratory limited, maybe they're so well developed at the heart and at the local level that they just need to learn how to be able to get more oxygen in, more CO2 out. You'll do fast starts with them. So to use that same example, they're doing that 2K row progression, the same 8 sets, 500-meter row, they're flipping it. So let's just say that their 2K pace was the same, a 135. I would actually have them start the first 100 meters at 125.
You're going to deplete them early, make them breathe heavy.
Yes. Yeah. So you're trying to get them to their VO2 peak as soon as possible. And here's like a simple way to think about it. If you did a 500-meter row and you're already well developed, when do you start breathing hard? Not really until like the last 100 meters. Yeah. So really in that interval, I'm only getting about 100 meters
worth of work. For me,
it's
like set 5. So
anybody gets the point of like, if you're already really, really well developed, or if you're going on a hard run, like, man, the first 20 minutes I was just kind of cruising, and then I finally was breathing hard. If I'm working on that limitation, I'm trying to it's bad pacing, right? We're trying to teach them how to pace poorly, again, only in their limiter-based training, but they'll do a fast start, 100 meters at 125, 100 meters at 130, 100 meters at 135, then 140,
What are they focusing on? You're not telling them anything, right? Because you don't want to create that internal focus.
No.
Focus on your breathing when you're 300 meters in. Like it's just hot start, and they're naturally going to be breathing heavier.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. I mean, if you do a hot start, even if you just warmed up really well and then you started, your 2K pace was 135, which is extremely fast, but you start at 125, you're going to be breathing hard within the first 100 meters.
And we're not telling people to focus on diaphragmatic breathing during that point
none
as
of
well.
that.
Yeah.
You don't need to think about that. Yeah. Now, there are tools. There's something called the Spiro Tiger. That's a breathing tool, basically a balloon that you breathe in and out of that can really help with that, learning how to breathe properly. Some people swear by it. I don't know. I've just played around with it a little bit. So like if you really are struggling in that department, you could use that. Or again, like something as simple as taking a sandbag, laying on the ground, putting the sandbag on your stomach, and learning how to breathe through your diaphragm can help in the sport. But I think there's nothing better than just doing CrossFit.
Diaphragmatic breathing too, right?
Yeah.
Like at the end of a session or just like in your off time, which is only going to help in many other ways, but learning how to breathe that way to begin with. Golly, I had a really good question was on the tip of my tongue. Now I can't freaking remember it. Dadgummit, it was good.
Well,
just keep
I'll
talking.
give, I'll
keep
give,
yapping, I'll cut it.
just real quick so we can kind of wrap this up because I know we've been just going all over the place.
Oh, no, I got it real quick. Tangent, real fast.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Okay. So, have you seen any correlation between somebody's personality type and personality or emotional disposition and being limited by respiration in particular? Maybe you, if you don't know where I'm going with that.
I've seen what they do for work limit their ability to breathe. So in other words, a lot of people that sit at a computer all day, they're rolled forward. It's going to be, from this position, it's really hard to get a breath in because they're so closed off.
Yeah.
And then like the macho man bodybuilder,
Yeah.
it's really hard to get a breath out because they're so opened up. So they're like, and they have no.
I'm thinking about high anxiety individuals, potentially like chest breathers.
Yeah.
Like short, choppy breaths. You know, like I'm wondering if there's any correlation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is.
I don't know how you would. Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
To kind of wrap it up, so like again, there's no research on this, but a good way that I do this with CrossFit is for that respiratory limited athlete. I still want to get them close to their VO2 peak right away and learn how to breathe. This is for someone that's good at the sport, that knows all the movements, that doesn't have a ton of movement deficiencies. Let's say they're doing intervals where it's echo bike, wall balls, burpees, and power snatches. I'll start them with 5 intervals where they're resting 1-to-1 between, and I tell them the first movement's an echo bike, they have to go at a hard pace. So it's like 12 cal or 15 cal echo bike at 10-minute or faster pace. What that does is it gets them breathing fast quickly, and then now it's like, hey, transition to the next movement quickly and execute well through the wall ball, bar-facing burpee, power snatch, and then they'll finish on the echo bike again where their goal is to maintain that same pace as above. You have to be pretty well developed to do something like that. But again, it's the same concept on the row where we're trying to get them to VO2 peak quickly, or at least as close to it as we can in an interval that is CrossFit based. And now they have to perform doing all the movements that CrossFit requires.
I mean, there's like 10 other things we could talk about, but we'll pause it there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. How would you tie a bow? Yeah.
You got any questions? I know that was a lot. I mean, for someone that's truly strength limited, I bias probably 70 to 80% of their training to strength focus. If their goal is performance, because to be able to play in the sport, you have to get stronger. Otherwise, like if there are a lot of people that just are like, I'm just going to do normal CrossFit all year, and then they get to the Open the next year and they're still limited by strength, and then it's like, okay, I'm just going to do CrossFit all year, and then the next year they get there and they're still limited by strength. Like that's what an insane person does, the same thing over and over again and the same results. So at some point you got to tell the athlete like, hey, you're continuing to be limited by the same thing. We need to make sure we work on this over the next year. I guess my question is 70%, what is the other 30%?
Play the game.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of integrated CrossFit work. I still want them to get better at the so like for you, like, yeah, you're getting stronger, but it's like, what are the skill limitations that you have? So you're doing a ton of skill work. You can still do some muscular endurance work because that's going to come out, but you're not going to do a ton of long aerobic or zone 2 work because that's just wasting time in your training that get better at the other things.
Depends too where the strength limitations are, right? If it's upper body, predominantly upper body, then you can get away with more lower body muscle endurance, and then vice versa. If it's full body, then you're going to have to be careful with the muscle endurance work that you're doing. What would you say if Gunclair, I'm going to ask a question for you. If he's like, what is the best kind of conditioning to get stronger? How would you respond to that?
Yeah,
I would say none of it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
I would still put in a lot of high powered intervals. So you may be doing, 10-second sprints, sled sprints, echo bike, rowing. You could do all that kind of stuff, but you're not going to see, you're doing a 20-minute row, rest 5 minutes times 3 that you may give someone that like truly needs endurance work. Cool.
Cool. Yeah.
Wrap up on this. Go ahead.
You want me to do it?
Yes.
What the heck, bro.
Do it in like your
Yeah, if
the
I intro, you
smoothest,
have to end.
the smoothest buttery voice. that
You're
you
the one
have.
with the
That is
podcasting
true. I
voice.
do have a podcast voice.
Yeah, someone told me once.
Yeah.
Someone
Yeah,
told
somebody once said. Yeah. Oh gosh, guys, when you put me in pressure like this, stop doing your conditioning wrong this offseason. If you want to do it right, hire a Mayhem performance coach.
Nice.